Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. 22 years on the Colorado State Patrol, and I thought I'd seen everything the interstate could throw at me. Fatal crashes, drug busts, human trafficking, you name it, I'd worked it. But that Thursday night in October 2022, when I pulled up behind a Ford Focus idling on the shoulder of I-70 near mile marker 412, something in my gut told me this was different. The driver's door was wide open, interior lights on, engine still running, purse sitting right there on the passenger seat with a wallet visible inside. The radio was playing some pop station, volume turned low, and a large Starbucks cup sat in the cup holder. Ice not even melted yet. No signs of a struggle, no skid marks on the asphalt, no debris. Just an empty car in the middle of nowhere, about 40 miles east of Lyman, where the nearest anything was a rundown gas station 15 miles back. I called it in immediately and started processing the scene while waiting for backup. The registration came back to a Jennifer Lawson, 26, from Denver. Her driver's license photo showed a blonde woman with green eyes and a small scar through her left eyebrow. I found her phone wedged between the driver's seat and center console, screen cracked but still functional, showing 17 missed calls from someone named Mel in the contacts. The last outgoing call was to 911 at 9:47 p.m., but it only lasted 8 seconds, not long enough for dispatch to get any information. What really caught my attention was the dash cam she had installed, one of those newer models that records both forward and interior views. I pulled the memory card right there, popped it into my patrol car's laptop, and started scrolling through the footage from earlier that evening. The footage started at 7:23 p.m. when she'd gotten into her car at a Shell station in Denver. Normal stuff at first, adjusting mirrors, checking her phone, taking a sip of coffee. She seemed relaxed, even singing along to the radio as she merged onto I-70. But at 8:41 p.m. things changed. The camera caught her checking her rearview mirror repeatedly, her posture stiffening. That's when I saw it in the forward-facing footage, a semi-truck with those obnoxious aftermarket LED headlights, staying precisely 3 car lengths behind her no matter how her speed varied. The truck was a white Peterbilt pulling a refrigerated trailer. No company markings, just a dot number on the side that I paused to write down. For the next hour, that truck shadowed her every move. Lane changes, speed variations, even when she took exit 395 and immediately got back on the highway. The truck did the exact same thing, never closing the gap, never falling back. At 9:31 p.m., the interior camera showed Jennifer's face clearly, tears streaming down her cheeks, her breathing rapid and shallow. She kept looking at her phone mounted on the dashboard, probably trying to figure out if she should call for help. The forward camera showed they were approaching the Agate rest stop, and she put on her turn signal. The truck immediately signaled too. But then she swerved back onto the highway at the last second, and the truck missed the exit, finally breaking the pattern. For about 30 seconds, you could see her shoulders relax, a small sob of relief escaping. Then the interior went completely white with light. The truck had turned off its running lights and hit her with full high beams, and what looked like additional floodlights mounted on the bumper. She couldn't see anything, swerving slightly as she tried to shade her eyes. That's when a second vehicle appeared in frame. A dark-colored van that had been running parallel in the right lane suddenly accelerated and pulled in front of her, brake lights flaring red. Jennifer was trapped, the van in front forcing her to slow down, the truck behind blinding her with lights. She tried to change lanes to the left, but a third vehicle, another SUV, had moved up to box her in on that side. The coordination was perfect, practiced. These people had done this before. At 9:44 p.m., she managed to grab her phone and dial 911, her voice barely audible on the dash cam audio. "Please help me, I'm on I-70, they're trying to..." And then the call cut off as the van in front slammed its brakes. Jennifer had to brake hard to avoid a collision, and that's when the passenger door of the SUV beside her opened, while both vehicles were still moving at about 40 miles per hour. A man in dark clothing and a baseball cap leaned out, holding what looked like a crowbar or tire iron, and smashed Jennifer's passenger window. Glass exploded across the interior, and she screamed, jerking the wheel to the right, tires hitting the rumble strip along the shoulder. The last 3 minutes of footage were the hardest to watch. Jennifer pulled onto the shoulder and stopped, probably thinking she was safer staying in a stationary car than trying to drive blind with glass in her eyes and 3 vehicles hunting her. The truck pulled up behind her, the van stopped in front, and the SUV blocked her on the left. She was fumbling with her seatbelt when the interior camera caught movement outside her driver's window, someone approaching from the truck. The timestamp read 9:47:33 p.m. Jennifer looked directly at the camera for a split second, her face a mask of pure terror, before her door was yanked open. There was a brief struggle, maybe 10 seconds of screaming and fighting, her hands gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles went white. Then she was dragged out of frame. The camera kept recording for another 43 minutes until I found the car, showing nothing but the empty interior and the dark highway beyond. I immediately called for every available unit and put out a bolo for all 3 vehicles. The dot number on the truck was fake, no registration in any database. But here's where years of working these highways paid off. I remembered something about rest stop complaints from truckers over the past few months. Pulling up the reports on my laptop, I found 7 separate complaints filed at different rest stops along I-70, all describing a white refrigerated truck with bright LED lights that would follow female drivers from the rest stops, sometimes for 20 or 30 miles before breaking off. Nobody had taken it seriously. Truckers follow the same routes. Sometimes it looks like following when it's just coincidence. But I cross-referenced the dates and times with missing person reports from Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska. 4 women, all traveling alone, all disappeared along I-70 in the last 16 months. Their cars were found at different locations, but always the same pattern. Abandoned on the shoulder, engine running, no signs of struggle at the scene. By dawn, we had helicopters up and K9 units searching the area. The dogs picked up Jennifer's scent leading from her car to where the truck had been parked. Then nothing. She'd been put into one of those vehicles. I spent the next 18 hours reviewing surveillance footage from every gas station, rest stop, and weigh station within a 100-mile radius. At a Flying J truck stop 70 miles east, time-stamped at 10:58 p.m., I found them. The same white Peterbilt pulling in for diesel, but now it had magnetic company signs. Morrison Refrigerated Transport, obviously fake but good enough to avoid suspicion. The driver was careful to keep his face away from the cameras, wearing a trucker cap pulled low and never looking up. But he made one mistake. He went inside to pay cash, and for just 2 seconds as he pushed open the door, the reflection in the glass showed his face clearly. I enhanced the image, ran it through facial recognition, and got a hit. Robert Vaughn, 43, former long-haul trucker who'd lost his CDL in 2017 after multiple violations. Last known address was in Topeka, but he'd dropped off the grid years ago. The break came from the refrigerated trailer itself. Those units have GPS tracking for temperature monitoring. The shipping companies want to know their cold chain hasn't been broken. Vaughn was smart enough to disable the main truck's GPS, but he didn't know about the secondary unit in the refrigeration system. It was still pinging every 30 minutes to a satellite. I contacted the manufacturer, Thermo King, and after some legal paperwork, they gave us access to the tracking data. The trailer had been stationary for the last 6 hours at an abandoned truck depot off Highway 24, about 40 miles north of the interstate. We assembled a tactical team, State Patrol, FBI, local SWAT. The depot hadn't been operational since 2008, but satellite imagery showed recent activity. Tire tracks, several vehicles parked behind the main building. We moved in at 3 p.m., exactly 17 hours after Jennifer had been taken. The property was bigger than we expected. 3 warehouses, a maintenance shop, and an old office building. all surrounded by rusted chain-link fence with gaps cut in multiple places. Vaughn's truck was parked behind the largest warehouse, but the refrigeration unit was off. My heart sank. These units were perfect for transporting victims, soundproof, no windows, temperature-controlled. But if it was off now, that could mean anything. SWAT breached the warehouse first, and what we found inside turned this from a kidnapping to something much worse. The building had been converted into makeshift cells. 8 shipping containers welded shut with small ventilation holes cut into the tops. Inside one of them, we found Jennifer, alive but severely dehydrated, along with 2 other women who'd been reported missing from Wyoming and Missouri. They'd been there for different lengths of time. The woman from Missouri, Catherine Brennan, had been held for 6 days. Vaughn wasn't working alone. We arrested 4 men at the scene. Vaughn, the van driver named Craig Fulton, and 2 others who were apparently buyers who'd driven in from Oklahoma that morning. The whole thing was a trafficking ring that had been operating for at least 2 years, targeting women traveling alone on remote stretches of interstate highways. They had notebooks documenting their surveillance at rest stops, rating potential targets, noting license plates, tracking patterns. Jennifer had first been spotted 3 weeks earlier, when she'd stopped at the same Shell station in Denver. They'd been waiting for her to make another trip. The sophistication of their operation was chilling. Police scanners, encrypted radios, multiple vehicles registered under fake names, even a contact at a DMV office who could run plates for them. They knew which stretches of highway had the least patrol coverage, which rest stops had broken cameras, which exits led to the most isolated secondary roads. During interrogation, Vaughn broke after 12 hours and gave us everything. The trafficking ring extended into 5 states with at least 11 women still missing and presumed sold. He provided locations, contacts, and most importantly, the address of a farmhouse in Oklahoma where 3 more women were being held. They were recovered alive within 4 hours. Jennifer spent a week in the hospital recovering physically, though the psychological trauma will take much longer to heal. She testified at the trial with incredible courage, her dashcam footage becoming the key piece of evidence that sent all 4 men to federal prison for life without parole. The FBI took over the larger investigation, ultimately arresting 23 people connected to the ring. As for me, I still patrol that same stretch of I-70, but now I look at every abandoned car differently. I stop at every vehicle on the shoulder no matter how routine it seems, because sometimes the most ordinary scene hides the most extraordinary evil. And sometimes if you're vigilant enough and lucky enough, you get there in time to stop it. The call came in at 10:47 p.m. on a Saturday night in April 2016, and from the dispatcher's voice, I knew we had something bad. Parents had returned home from their anniversary dinner to find their teenage babysitter missing, and their 2 young children alone in the house. Detective Angela Foster. I'd been handling abduction cases in suburban Illinois for over a decade by then, and certain details in that initial report made every instinct I had start firing. A 17-year-old girl doesn't just abandon 2 kids she's responsible for. Not without her purse, not without her car still parked in the driveway, not without even sending a text. By the time my partner Jason and I pulled up to the Andersons' split-level ranch on Willow Court, every light in the house was on, and I could see neighbors starting to gather on their porches. That particular kind of suburban curiosity mixed with genuine concern that happens when police cars show up in quiet neighborhoods. Inside the house, the scene was controlled chaos. Mrs. Anderson was in the kitchen calling everyone in the babysitter's contact list while Mr. Anderson sat with their 2 kids in the living room. 8-year-old Noah had his arm protective around his 6-year-old sister Lily, who was clutching a painted rock like her life depended on it. The babysitter was Megan Brooks, honor student volleyball player, had been sitting for the Andersons for about 6 months without a single issue. Her purse was still on the kitchen counter, keys inside, phone plugged into the charger by the couch where she'd been sitting. But it was Noah who gave us the breakthrough we needed. That kid had a memory like a court reporter. He told us that around 7:45 p.m., someone rang the doorbell, a delivery driver in a brown uniform carrying a clipboard and a small package. The driver had asked Megan to come out to his truck to sign for something, said his electronic scanner was malfunctioning, and he needed a signature on paper. Noah had been watching from the stairs, supposed to be asleep, but had wanted another glass of water. According to Noah, Megan had hesitated at first. Smart girl. She'd asked the driver why he couldn't just leave the package, but the man insisted it required a signature because it was insured or valuable, or something like that. He'd been persistent but friendly, Noah said, kept smiling and apologizing for the inconvenience. The truck was a white cargo van with some kind of delivery logo on the side, though Noah couldn't remember the exact company name. Just that it had blue letters and maybe a picture of a box or an arrow. Megan had finally agreed, told the kids she'd be right back, just needed to step outside for a second. Noah watched from the window as she walked down the driveway. The driver had opened the back of the van, pointing at something inside, and Megan had leaned in to look. That's when Noah said everything changed. The man grabbed her from behind, pushed her into the van in one quick motion, and slammed the doors. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. Noah ran to get the phone, but by the time he got back to the window, the van was already turning the corner at the end of the street. The kid was remarkably composed as he told us this, but I could see his hands trembling slightly where they gripped his sister's shoulders. Lily hadn't seen anything. She'd been in the bathroom when it happened, which was probably a mercy. We immediately put out a bolo for a white cargo van with blue lettering, but I knew we were already fighting against time. These kinds of planned abductions, where someone poses as a delivery driver or service worker, they're never random. Someone had been watching Megan, knew she'd be babysitting that night, knew the Andersons would be gone. I had Jason start pulling security footage from the neighbors while I called in every available unit. The Andersons had a doorbell camera, but conveniently it had been malfunctioning for the past 2 days. Later we'd find out someone had been hitting it with a targeted Wi-Fi jammer. This wasn't some amateur operation. Whoever took Megan had done their homework, probably been planning this for weeks. By 11:30 p.m. we had 3 solid leads. First, the Jeffersons from 2 houses down had a Tesla in their driveway, and the car's Sentry mode had captured partial footage of the van, enough to see it was a rental from a company called Quick Haul Rentals. Second, Megan's best friend Claire had called us sobbing, saying Megan had mentioned a weird encounter at the mall food court the previous weekend. Some guy in his 30s had approached her, complimented her volleyball team jacket, and tried to strike up a conversation about local high school sports. Megan had thought he was creepy but harmless, maybe just a lonely guy trying to make conversation. She'd mentioned he had this distinctive scar through his left eyebrow and kept fidgeting with a class ring on his right hand, details that would prove crucial later. Third, and this was the big one, another babysitter from the same neighborhood had reported a similar incident just 2 weeks prior. A man in a delivery uniform had come to the door while she was watching the Harper kids, but she'd refused to go outside because the package wasn't addressed to anyone in the house. She'd watched him through the peephole as he stood there for almost a full minute before finally leaving. The Quick Haul lead paid off first. Jason got the rental records within an hour. The van had been rented using a fake ID and a prepaid credit card, but the guy had made one mistake. He'd filled up at a gas station near the rental place, and that gas station had crystal clear security footage. We ran his face through recognition software and got a hit. Bradley Morse, 34 years old, with a previous arrest for attempted kidnapping in Indiana 5 years ago. He'd served 18 months and then disappeared off the radar. The moment we had his name, everything started falling into place. His cell phone records showed he'd been at the Anderson Street at least 6 times in the past month. Credit card records had him buying a Wi-Fi jammer online 2 weeks ago. But here's what chilled me to the bone. He'd rented a storage unit across town 3 days before the abduction. When we got the warrant and raced over there, we found it set up like some kind of sick holding cell. Soundproofing foam on the walls, chains bolted to the floor, cases of water and non-perishable food. He'd been planning to keep her there, but Megan wasn't in the storage unit. The chain on the floor had fresh scratches but no blood, which meant he'd brought her there but moved her. We pulled traffic cameras from around the storage facility and spotted the van leaving at 11:15 p.m., just 15 minutes before we'd arrived. He must have been monitoring police channels or had some kind of alert system set up. The van was heading north on Route 47, and we had units converging from every direction. I was in the passenger seat while Jason drove, coordinating with dispatch and watching the helicopter feed on my tablet. The chopper spotted the van first, abandoned in a rest stop parking lot about 8 miles from the storage unit. My heart sank. He'd switched vehicles, but then I noticed something on the thermal imaging. 2 heat signatures in the woods behind the rest stop, one moving slowly, supporting the other. He was on foot with Megan, probably hoping to reach the old industrial area where there were dozens of abandoned buildings to hide in. We surrounded the woods within minutes. K-9 units went in from the south while tactical teams moved in from the north. I stayed at the command post, watching the thermal feeds and coordinating movements. At 12:43 a.m., I heard the call I'd been praying for. Suspect in custody, victim is alive, requesting medical. When they brought Megan out, she was dehydrated and had some bruising on her wrists from the restraints, but she was conscious and talking. She told us Morse had been rambling during the drive, talking about how she was perfect and how he'd been watching her for months, learning her schedule, her habits. He'd found her through her volleyball team's social media page, had been to several of her games, even taken pictures. The really twisted part? He thought she'd eventually understand and appreciate all the planning he'd done, like this was some kind of romantic gesture instead of a kidnapping. He'd gotten spooked when he heard sirens near the storage unit and decided to move to his backup location, but Megan had managed to slow him down by pretending to be sicker than she was, stumbling, needing frequent breaks. The interrogation revealed just how deep this went. Morse had a notebook in his apartment with detailed observations about 12 different young women in the area, all between 16 and 19, all athletes of some kind. Megan had been his primary target, but he had backup plans for the others. Each entry had their schedules, their friends' names, their favorite coffee shops, which houses they babysat at, even what kind of music they listened to based on their social media posts. He'd been using multiple fake social media accounts to follow them, sometimes engaging in brief conversations to gather more information. The delivery driver disguise wasn't original. He'd gotten the idea from true crime forums online where people discussed successful abduction methods. He'd practiced the approach 3 times with the other babysitters in different neighborhoods, refining his technique each time. What scared me most was how patient he'd been, spending 6 months building up to this moment, never rushing, never making obvious mistakes until that gas station stop. During Megan's recovery at the hospital, she told me something that still haunts me. When Morse had pushed her into the van, he'd whispered that he'd been inside the Andersons' house before, during an open house event when they were thinking of selling the previous year. He'd memorized the layout, knew which windows had the best view of the street, even knew about the loose floorboard in the hallway that creaked. He'd chosen that specific night because he knew the Andersons had anniversary dinner reservations. He'd overheard Mrs. Anderson talking about it at the grocery store 2 weeks earlier while he stood behind her in line. The level of surveillance was staggering. We found receipts showing he'd bought items just to be in the same stores as his targets, joined gym trial memberships to watch them at their sports practices, even volunteered at a charity 5K race where several of them were running. Every interaction had been calculated, planned, documented in that sick notebook of his. The trial was swift. With all the evidence we'd collected, Morse's public defender convinced him to take a plea deal. 25 to life. No possibility of parole for 20 years. But what stuck with me wasn't the sentence. It was what we uncovered in the weeks that followed. 3 other attempted abductions in neighboring states over the past 2 years matched his MO exactly. Fake delivery driver, young female babysitters, white rental vans. The victims had all reported it, but without the van being caught or any physical evidence, the cases had gone cold. We were able to close all 3 cases and add them to his charges. Megan went back to school after a month, graduated with her class, even got a volleyball scholarship to state. She sends me a Christmas card every year, always with a picture of her doing something amazing, climbing mountains, graduating college, starting her career as a physical therapist. She's 24 now, married last spring to a guy she met in college. But I know she still checks her locks 3 times before bed, still gets nervous when delivery trucks pull up to wherever she's living, still has that moment of panic when someone she doesn't recognize knows her name. The Andersons moved out of state 6 months after the incident. Noah, that brave kid who'd given us the crucial details that helped us find Megan so quickly, had started having nightmares about vans and strangers at the door. They needed a fresh start somewhere where every delivery truck didn't trigger a panic attack. Before they left, Mrs. Anderson told me something that perfectly captured why these cases hit so hard. They'd hired Megan specifically because she seemed so responsible, so careful, the kind of girl who would never put their kids in danger. They'd done everything right, and it still happened. That's the thing about predators like Morse. They count on people doing everything right, following normal patterns, trusting in everyday situations. As for me, this case changed how I train new detectives. I always tell them to pay attention to the attempted crimes, the near misses, the reports that seem minor. Morse had tested his method 3 times before he succeeded with Megan. If we'd connected those dots earlier, maybe we could have prevented this. Now we have a task force dedicated to tracking patterns in attempted abductions, looking for practice runs and failed attempts. Because of Megan's case, we've stopped 2 other predators before they succeeded. It's not enough, never will be, but it's something. I need to get this out there, need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind. 23 years on the force, and I thought I'd seen everything that could crawl out from the darker corners of this city. Detective Aaron Miles, that's me, or was, until last Saturday changed everything. I was pulling weekend duty at the precinct, one of those quiet shifts where you catch up on paperwork and drink too much stale coffee. My partner was out with the flu, and most of the department was skeleton crew. Around 2 p.m., they brought in this guy for a string of residential burglaries. Nothing special, just another repeat offender named Vincent Caldwell. Middle-aged, unremarkable, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. They asked me to handle the interrogation since I was the only senior detective available. Figured it would be a straightforward confession and booking. The moment I walked into that interrogation room, something felt different about Caldwell. He was sitting there perfectly still, hands folded on the metal table, staring at the one-way mirror like he could see right through it. Most suspects are nervous, fidgety, trying to figure out their story or asking for lawyers. Not him. He watched me sit down with this peculiar intensity, like a cat tracking a mouse, and when I introduced myself and read him his rights, he just nodded slowly. I started with the standard questions about the burglaries, showed him photos from the crime scenes, but he barely glanced at them. Instead, he leaned forward, close enough that I could smell the mint gum he was chewing, and said something that made every hair on my neck stand up. "Detective Miles, I think we should talk about the Riverside Park case first. You remember that one, don't you? Summer of 2008, the woman with the butterfly tattoo on her ankle. The Riverside Park case. Jesus Christ. That was one of my first homicides as lead detective, and we never solved it. The victim, Maria Gonzalez, was found strangled near the jogging path, and that butterfly tattoo was a detail we never released to the press. I kept my expression neutral, years of interrogation training kicking in, but my mind was racing. How could this small-time burglar know about that? I tried to redirect him back to the burglaries, but Caldwell just smiled. Not a normal smile, but this slow, deliberate stretching of his lips that never reached his eyes. She fought hard, detective. Scraped her attacker's arms with those acrylic nails she loved so much. Pink with little rhinestones, remember? You bagged them yourself at the scene. But you never found the skin cells underneath them, did you? Someone cleaned them before you got there. My mouth went dry. He was right about the nails, right about everything, details that were never in any report accessible to the public. I pulled out my phone to start recording, making sure to state the date and time clearly, while Caldwell sat there watching me with that unnatural stillness. "Are you confessing to the murder of Maria Gonzalez?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head like I'd asked something amusing. "Confessing? No, detective, I'm just remembering. Like how I remember the Warehouse District case from 2011. The accountant, Gregory Simmons, found in his car with his throat cut. You thought it was suicide at first, didn't you? Until you found those defensive wounds on his palms." My chest tightened. Gregory Simmons, another cold case, another failure that haunted me. The man had been found in an abandoned warehouse parking lot. And yes, we'd initially suspected suicide until the autopsy revealed those wounds. Caldwell continued, his voice taking on this almost hypnotic rhythm. He was left-handed, wore a Rolex his wife gave him for their anniversary. The watch was never found, was it? But you already knew that. You spent weeks looking for it, checking pawn shops, questioning dealers. The interrogation room suddenly felt smaller, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing louder than usual. I stood up, needing to move, to think, but Caldwell kept talking. Then there was the college student in 2014, Bethany Russell, found in her apartment, staged to look like an overdose. You were the one who noticed the bruising pattern on her arms didn't match, weren't you? Someone had held her down while they forced those pills down her throat. The roommate's alibi checked out. The boyfriend was 3 states away. Another dead end for Detective Miles. Each word hit like a physical blow. Bethany Russell. I'd fought with the department for months to keep that case open, convinced it was murder, but without leads. It went cold like the others. No one outside the investigative team knew about the bruising pattern inconsistencies. I finally found my voice. "Who are you? How do you know these things?" Caldwell stood up too, and even though he was handcuffed to the table, I instinctively took a step back. "I know because I pay attention, detective. I watch. I listen. I collect stories." "You want to know the interesting part?" Caldwell sat back down, chains rattling against the metal table. Each of these victims had something in common. They all filed complaints with Internal Affairs. Maria Gonzalez reported excessive force during a traffic stop. Gregory Simmons was set to testify about financial irregularities he'd discovered in the police pension fund. Bethany Russell had video evidence of 2 officers planting drugs during a raid at her friend's house. My legs felt weak. I did remember those complaints. They'd all been dismissed or withdrawn before investigation. Caldwell's eyes never left mine as he continued. "Funny how their cases all ended up on your desk, isn't it? The dedicated detective who tried so hard but just couldn't crack them. You even kept personal files at home, didn't you? In that locked filing cabinet in your garage. The one behind the old lawnmower." The room spun slightly. Nobody knew about those files. I'd been building my own investigation for years, suspecting something was rotten in the department but never finding proof. This couldn't be happening. I slammed my fist on the table, trying to regain control of the situation. "Enough games. Who sent you? Who's feeding you this information?" Caldwell laughed, a dry, raspy sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Nobody sent me, detective. I came here on purpose, got myself arrested for those petty burglaries just so I could have this conversation with you. See, I've been watching you for a long time, the only honest cop in a department full of snakes. You've been getting close to the truth, haven't you? Those late nights connecting dots, finding patterns. But every time you get close, something happens. A witness disappears, evidence goes missing, you get reassigned to another case." He was right. Every damn time I'd made progress on understanding the connections between these murders, roadblocks appeared. Just last month, a key witness in the Gonzalez case had agreed to talk, then suddenly moved out of state with no forwarding address. "Here's what you don't know," Caldwell continued, pulling a small piece of paper from his mouth. He must have had it tucked under his tongue the whole time. "Tomorrow they're going to find another body. A social worker named Diana Walsh. She's been dead for 3 days, but they'll discover her tomorrow morning in Riverside Park, same spot as Maria Gonzalez. Before I could respond, before I could even process what he was saying, Caldwell pushed the paper across the table with his cuffed hands. That's her address. She's probably still alive right now, has maybe 6 hours left if the pattern holds. But here's the real question, Detective. When you try to leave this building to save her, who's going to stop you? When you call for backup, who can you trust? Because I guarantee you someone's watching this interrogation room feed right now, and they're not happy about our little chat. I grabbed the paper, my mind racing through possibilities. If he was telling the truth, a woman's life was in danger. If he was lying, this could all be an elaborate trap. But the details he knew, the things he'd said, it all pointed to something much bigger than a simple burglar's confession. I stood up and moved toward the door, then stopped. The red recording light on the camera in the corner, which had been steady since I entered, was now blinking irregularly. Someone was watching, possibly deleting the recording in real time. "One more thing, Detective," Caldwell called out as I reached for the door handle. "Check your phone. Should be getting a message right about now." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. The text was just 4 words. "Your wife, Highland Mall." My wife Carol was supposed to be at her sister's house across town, nowhere near Highland Mall. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. Then another text. "Come alone, leave Caldwell. You have 20 minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked back at Caldwell, who was now standing again, leaning as far forward as his restraints would allow. "They're going to make you choose, Detective. Save the social worker or save your wife. But here's what they don't know. I already called in an anonymous tip about Diana Walsh 3 hours ago from a burner phone I ditched. Used your badge number, actually. There should be units heading to her place any minute now. So you can go to Highland Mall, save Carol. But when you do, remember this. I'm not your enemy. I'm the only person trying to help you stay alive long enough to expose them." The door to the interrogation room suddenly opened, and Captain Frank Russo walked in. My supervisor for the past 5 years, a man I'd trusted with my life. "Everything all right in here, Aaron?" Russo asked, but his eyes were cold, calculating. He looked at Caldwell, then at me, and I saw his hand move slightly toward his service weapon. "Got a call saying you might be having some trouble with the suspect. Why don't you take a break? I'll handle the rest of this interrogation." The weight of the situation crashed down on me. Russo had never monitored my interrogations before, never shown up unannounced like this. The way he was positioning himself between me and the door, the way his jacket was unbuttoned for easy access to his weapon. Everything screamed danger. Caldwell spoke up, his voice different now, scared. "Captain Russo, thank God you're here. This detective has been threatening me, trying to make me confess to murders I didn't commit. He said he'd plant evidence if I didn't cooperate." It was a performance, but for whose benefit? Russo's expression darkened. "Is that so? Aaron, I'm going to need your weapon and badge. We'll need to investigate these allegations." Another buzz from my phone. This time it was a photo. Carol's car in the Highland Mall parking garage. Someone in dark clothing standing next to the driver's door. I had seconds to make a decision that would change everything. Looking Russo straight in the eye, I pulled out my gun. But instead of handing it over, I placed it on the table and stepped back, keeping my hands visible. "Frank, we've known each other for 5 years. If you're part of this, just tell me why. Why Maria? Why Gregory? Why Bethany?" For a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition that the game was up. "I don't know what this suspect has been telling you, Aaron, but you're clearly having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress of all those cold cases finally got to you." He reached for his radio, and I knew once he called for backup, I'd never make it out of the building. So I did the only thing I could. I grabbed the metal chair and swung it at the one-way mirror, shattering it completely. The sound was deafening, glass exploding everywhere, and in the chaos, I heard Caldwell laughing. Through the broken window, I could see into the observation room where two other detectives, Paulson and Burke, were standing with their weapons already drawn. They'd been waiting there the whole time. Everything happened in slow motion after that. I dove for my gun on the table as Russo reached for his. Caldwell, still cuffed to the table, kicked his chair backward, causing Russo to stumble. The gunshot was impossibly loud in that small room, but it wasn't from Russo's gun or mine. Paulson had fired through the broken mirror, the bullet catching Russo in the shoulder, spinning him around. In the confusion, they must have thought Russo was drawing on them, not me. I didn't wait to sort it out. I grabbed my phone and ran, hearing shouts behind me but not stopping. Carol's life depended on me getting to Highland Mall. I made it to my car somehow, speeding through red lights, calling Carol's phone over and over. When I finally reached the parking garage 15 minutes later, I found her car empty, driver's door open, her purse on the ground. But there was something else. A manila envelope on the driver's seat with my name on it. Inside were photographs, documents, bank records, evidence of everything Caldwell had been talking about. A whole network of corrupt cops taking money to eliminate people who threatened to expose the department. And at the bottom, a note in Carol's handwriting. "Aaron, I'm safe. Vincent got me out 2 hours ago. He's been protecting both of us. Trust him. Go to the FBI field office. Don't go home." I never saw Caldwell again after that day. He somehow disappeared from custody during the chaos, and nobody could explain how. The FBI investigation that followed was massive. 17 officers arrested, including Russo, who survived his wound only to face life in prison. They found Diana Walsh alive. The units had reached her just as 2 masked men were breaking into her apartment. The evidence in that envelope, combined with my testimony and the files from my garage, which the FBI retrieved before the corrupt cops could destroy them, exposed a decade-long conspiracy where officers were taking contracts to eliminate witnesses and whistleblowers. As for Vincent Caldwell, the FBI could find no record of him existing before 2007. No birth certificate, no social security number that checked out. Nothing. One agent told me off the record that they suspected he might have been deep undercover federal law enforcement, maybe even CIA, investigating the same corruption from a different angle. But officially, he was a ghost. Carol and I relocated, started fresh in a new city where nobody knows I used to be a cop. Sometimes I wonder if Caldwell is still out there, watching other corrupt departments, playing the role of criminal to expose the real criminals. But what haunts me most is his final message, which I found tucked in those documents. A list of 5 other cities with dates next to them, and a simple note. "This is bigger than just your precinct, detective. They're everywhere." I turned that list over to the FBI, but I never heard what came of it. All I know is that Saturday afternoon in that interrogation room, a supposed burglar saved my life, my wife's life, and helped bring down some of the most dangerous people I'd ever known, the ones hiding behind badges. "7 months ago, I was working as a deputy sheriff in a small county in Montana. I'd been on the force for about 4 years at that point, mostly dealing with drunk drivers, domestic disputes, and the occasional meth lab bust. Life was pretty routine for a 32-year-old cop in a place where everybody knew everybody. I lived alone in a small apartment above the hardware store on Main Street, spent my weekends fishing at the reservoir, and thought I'd pretty much seen everything our quiet corner of the world had to offer. That Wednesday in March changed everything. It was one of those days where the snow had just melted, leaving everything muddy and gray, and the dispatch calls had been slow all morning. I remember I'd just finished my gas station coffee and was thinking about heading back to the station when the call came through. The dispatcher, Betty, told me about a 2-vehicle collision out on County Road 42, about 15 miles from town. Nothing unusual about that. The road gets slippery after the snow melts and people drive too fast around those curves. Betty said the caller reported minor damage, possible injuries, and hung up before giving more details. The number came back as a disposable phone, which wasn't that weird since we get a lot of truckers passing through who use burners. I told her I'd check it out and started driving. County Road 42 runs through dense pine forest for most of its length, with thick woods on both sides that block out most of the sunlight even during the day. As I drove deeper into that stretch of road, my radio started getting staticky, which was normal for that area. The trees were so thick that cell service was basically non-existent out there, and even our radio signals got weak. About 12 miles in, I saw the first vehicle, a blue pickup truck sitting diagonal across the road with its front bumper crumpled against a guardrail. The hazard lights were blinking in that steady rhythm that always makes accident scenes feel eerily quiet. I pulled up about 30 feet behind it and grabbed my radio to update dispatch, but all I got was static. I'd have to wait until I drove back toward town to report in properly. I put on my hat, grabbed my flashlight even though it was still daylight, and stepped out. The air smelled like pine sap and wet earth, and the only sounds were birds somewhere up in the trees and the tick-tick-tick of the truck's hazards. I walked around the pickup first, noting the Montana plates and the damage to the front end. The windshield had a spider web crack on the passenger side, but no blood that I could see. Both doors were hanging open, which made my training kick in. People don't usually leave doors open unless they're in a hurry. The second vehicle was about 40 feet ahead, a silver sedan pressed up against a massive pine tree on the opposite side of the road. Its hood was buckled up like an accordion, steam still wisping from the radiator. The driver's door was open too, and the airbag had deployed. I called out, using my official voice, the one they teach you at the academy that carries authority but doesn't escalate situations. "Sheriff's Department. Is anyone hurt? I'm here to help." My voice echoed slightly in the forest, but no response came back. I approached the sedan and looked inside. The airbag had that chalky residue all over the steering wheel and dashboard. There was a purse on the passenger seat, contents spilled out, lipstick, receipts, a wallet with cards visible. But no driver, no passengers, nobody. I stood up and scanned the tree line. Sometimes people walk away from accidents in shock, confused and disoriented. They could be wandering in the woods, injured and needing help. I walked back to check between the vehicles, looking for any signs of blood on the asphalt, torn clothing, anything that might indicate where the drivers went. That's when I noticed the skid marks, or rather, the lack of them. There should have been black rubber streaks on the road from sudden braking, especially with this kind of impact damage. But the asphalt was clean except for some scattered glass and plastic pieces from the headlights. I knelt down near the sedan and touched the hood. The metal was barely warm, and the steam from the radiator was more like a thin mist. These cars had been here for at least an hour, maybe 2. But Betty said the call came in 20 minutes ago. I stood up slowly, and that's when my instincts started screaming at me. 23 years of living in Montana, 4 years as a cop, and you develop a sense for when things don't add up. The scene was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. I reached for my radio again, knowing it would be useless, but needing to try anyway. Pure static filled my ear. I walked back toward my cruiser, deciding I'd drive back up the road until I got a signal to call for backup. As I moved past the pickup truck, I noticed something I'd missed before. The keys were still in the ignition, and the engine was off, but the battery was on, powering those hazard lights. The registration on the dash showed an address from 2 counties over. I took a photo with my phone, even though I had no signal to send it anywhere. Then I heard it, a branch snapping in the woods to my left, maybe 50 yards into the trees. Not the random crack of a falling twig, but the distinct sound of weight on wood. I turned toward the sound, keeping my hand on my service weapon but not drawing it yet. "Sheriff's Department," I called out again. "If you're injured, I need you to respond. I'm here to help." Another snap, this time from the opposite side of the road behind the sedan. My training told me to get back to the cruiser immediately. This wasn't an accident scene anymore. It was something else entirely. I started walking backward toward my vehicle, keeping my eyes on the tree line when I saw him. A man in dark clothes, standing perfectly still about 30 feet into the woods on my left. He wasn't hiding exactly. just standing there between two thick pines watching me. I couldn't make out his face clearly in the shadows, but I could see he was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing what looked like a hunting jacket. "Sir, I need you to come out where I can see you," I said, using my command voice while unsnapping my holster. He didn't move, didn't respond, just kept standing there. Then I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Another figure, this one on the right side of the road, partially concealed behind a fallen log. My heart was hammering now, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm calling for backup. Everyone needs to come out of the woods with your hands visible." The man on the left took a step forward, not toward me but parallel to the road, moving to position himself between me and my cruiser. That's when I drew my weapon, keeping it at low ready. "Stop right there! Do not move!" He stopped, but I could see him more clearly now. White male, probably mid-40s, with a thick beard and something in his hand. It looked like a radio or phone. The figure on the right stood up slowly, revealing a woman with long dark hair tied back, also holding something. They were coordinating, I realized. They had radios and were working together. This was planned. The accident scene, the call to dispatch, the specific location with no cell service, all of it was to get a deputy out here alone. I started backing up faster, weapon raised now, alternating my aim between the two of them. "Both of you, drop whatever you're holding and get on the ground. Now!" Neither of them complied. Instead, the man raised his radio to his mouth and said something I couldn't hear. That's when I heard car doors slamming behind me, from the vehicles in the staged accident. I spun around to see two more people climbing out of the pickup truck's bed where they'd been hiding under a tarp. One was a younger guy, maybe 25, with a shaved head and neck tattoos. The other was an older woman wearing a baseball cap pulled low. They'd been there the whole time while I'd been investigating, just waiting. I was surrounded. 4 people, positioned to cut off any escape route. My cruiser was 20 feet away, but the bearded man was closer to it than I was. I kept my weapon moving between targets, trying to watch all of them at once. "Whatever you're planning, it's not worth it," I said loudly. "Every deputy in the county knows I'm out here. They'll come looking when I don't report back." The bearded man actually smiled at that, and it made my gut twist. "Laura," he said, and hearing my name from his mouth made everything worse. "Deputy Green, 4 years on the force, lives alone above Porter's Hardware, drives a blue Jeep when you're off duty, goes fishing at the reservoir on Saturdays." He knew me. They all knew exactly who I was. This wasn't random. I was specifically targeted. The woman with the dark hair spoke up then, her voice strangely calm. "We know your routine, Laura. We know Betty at dispatch is working alone until 6. We know your backup is at least 25 minutes away dealing with that convenient bar fight on the other side of the county." A bar fight. They'd orchestrated a distraction too. The younger guy with the neck tattoos started walking toward the sedan, and I swung my weapon toward him. "Don't move." He ignored me, reaching into the car's back seat and pulling out a black duffel bag. "You're going to want to hear what we have to say," the bearded man continued. "About why we went through all this trouble. About what really happened to your partner 3 years ago." My partner. Tommy Brenner had died in what was ruled a suicide 3 years ago. Found in his garage with the car running, doors closed. But I never believed it. Tommy had a 6-year-old daughter, a wife he adored, and we'd just cracked a major drug trafficking case. The younger guy unzipped the duffel bag and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. "Tommy was getting close to something," the woman said. "Something that certain people in your department didn't want exposed. He came to us for help. We're private investigators, formerly FBI. He hired us to protect his family and gather evidence, but they got to him before we could finish." My weapon was getting heavy in my extended arms, but I kept it raised. "You're lying. This is some kind of—" The bearded man interrupted. "Check your left jacket pocket, Laura, the inside one." I didn't move. "You'll find a flash drive," he continued. "We put it there when you were examining the sedan. Everything Tommy gathered is on there. Badge numbers, dates, photos. Your sheriff took $2 million from the cartel to look the other way. Tommy found out." The older woman in the baseball cap finally spoke, her voice gravelly. "We staged this whole thing because we knew you were the only clean cop left who gave a damn about Tommy. But we also knew you'd never trust us if we just approached you. We needed you to see how deep this goes, how much they've been watching you too. That bar fight? Your sheriff sent those deputies there personally. He knows we're here, Laura. He's been tracking you just like we have, waiting to see if you'd start digging into Tommy's death." I felt the weight of the flash drive in my pocket then, even though I hadn't noticed anyone getting that close to me. My mind was racing. Sheriff Randall had been unusually interested in closing Tommy's case quickly. He'd personally handled the paperwork, hadn't allowed an autopsy. "If this is true," I said slowly, "then why all this? Why not just—" The bearded man raised his radio again. "Because in about 3 minutes, Sheriff Randall and 2 deputies he trusts are going to arrive here. He got a call about you finding something at an accident scene. You need to decide right now, Laura. Come with us and help us finish what Tommy started, or stay and explain to Randall why you're out here. But if you stay, that flash drive disappears and so might you." I could hear engines in the distance now, getting closer. Multiple vehicles. They were right. Someone was coming. The woman with dark hair moved toward a gap in the trees I hadn't noticed before, where a dirt trail led deeper into the forest. "We have vehicles waiting a quarter mile in," she said. "Tommy's widow and daughter are in witness protection. We can take you somewhere safe while you review the evidence. The FBI field office in Billings has agents ready to move once you verify what's on that drive, but it has to be your choice." I thought about Tommy's daughter, Sophie. She'd be 9 now. I thought about how his wife, Janet, had left town immediately after the funeral, supposedly to live with her sister. I thought about Sheriff Randall at Tommy's funeral, giving a speech about the dangers of the job taking a toll. The engines were getting louder. I lowered my weapon and made my choice. "If you're lying to me—" The bearded man was already moving. "We're not, but we need to go, now." I holstered my weapon and followed them into the trees, leaving my cruiser behind. We moved quickly through the forest, branches catching at my uniform. Behind us, I heard vehicles pulling up to the staged accident scene, doors slamming, voices shouting. Sheriff Randall's voice carried through the trees, barking orders to search the area. The older woman led us to 2 SUVs hidden behind thick brush, engines already running. As I climbed into the back of the first vehicle, the younger guy with tattoos turned to me. "Your partner was a good man. He recorded everything, meetings, phone calls, conversations. It's all on that drive." We drove for 2 hours, switching vehicles once, before arriving at a safe house near the state line. I spent the next 3 days reviewing Tommy's evidence with 2 FBI agents who'd been investigating the sheriff's department from the outside. The recordings were damning. Sheriff Randall, 2 deputies, and even a judge were all on the cartel's payroll. Tommy had documented everything meticulously before they killed him. The arrests happened 2 weeks later. 15 people in total, including Randall. He's serving life without parole now. I testified in a closed courtroom for my own safety, then entered witness protection myself for 6 months until the trials were over. I'm in a different state now, working for a federal task force that investigates police corruption. The private investigators, I learned their names were Howard, Elena, Dottie, and Marcus. They saved my life that day. That staged accident scene was the most terrifying and important moment of my career. Sometimes the real danger isn't what's hiding in the woods, it's what's hiding behind a badge. The radio crackled to life at 1:47 a.m. while I was parked behind the abandoned Texaco station on Highway 36, drinking cold coffee and watching for speeders. Joyce's voice came through dispatch with that particular tone she reserved for situations that didn't fit the usual categories. Not quite emergency, but definitely not normal either. I'd been a deputy with Sheridan County Sheriff's Department in rural Kansas for over 2 decades, and Joyce Hartman had been manning that dispatch desk even longer, developing an instinct for when something genuinely strange was happening in our stretch of farmland. My partner that night was Colton Briggs, 6 months fresh from the academy and still checking his equipment every hour like they taught him in training. We covered roughly 900 square miles of wheat fields, cattle ranches, and scattered homesteads where maybe 3,000 people lived their quiet lives. Most of our calls involved cattle loose on the highway, teenagers stealing beer from the gas and go, or old farmers shooting at coyotes too close to populated areas. But Joyce was telling us about the Whelan family out on County Road 18, and her voice had that careful quality that made me set down my coffee and start the engine before she even finished explaining. According to Joyce, Mrs. Whelan had called in a panic, whispering that someone had been circling their house for the past hour, trying every door handle and pushing on windows, never responding when Mr. Whelan shouted warnings from inside. Colton and I killed our headlights 2 miles from their property, navigating by moonlight down those dusty gravel roads that turned to powder in August. When we pulled up to the 2-story farmhouse, every light inside was blazing, and I could see faces pressed against the upstairs windows. The Whelan kids watching us arrive like we were the cavalry. Mr. Whelan met us at the door holding his grandfather's shotgun with shaking hands, explaining how the footsteps had been so steady, so patient, circling again and again like whoever it was had all the time in the world. We searched the property with our flashlights, and that's when things got interesting. Perfect boot prints in the dirt, walking the exact same path around the house 3 times, cigarette butts dropped at regular intervals like breadcrumbs, and fresh scratches on the door frames where someone had been working at the locks with what looked like a filed-down butter knife. The precision of it made my neck prickle. This wasn't some drunk farmhand or teenage prank. 2 nights later, we got 3 more calls between midnight and 4 a.m., all from families living within a 5-mile radius of the Whelan place. The Garfields on Timber Road reported someone pressing their face against their ground floor windows, breathing fog onto the glass and drawing shapes in it with their finger. The elderly Kramer couple heard someone trying to jimmy their cellar door with what sounded like metal tools, working at it for 20 minutes before giving up. The 3rd call came from a single mother named Deb Carpenter, who lived in a converted trailer on the edge of the Garrison property. She'd woken up to find someone had removed the screen from her bedroom window and was running their fingers along the glass, tapping in a rhythm like they were playing piano. Each scene showed the same methodical approach, careful footprints, those same brand cigarette butts, and an unsettling patience that suggested whoever this was had been watching these homes for a while, learning the routines, noting which windows had broken locks or which doors had weak frames. Colton started mapping the incidents on his phone, and we both noticed they formed a rough circle around the abandoned Hutchinson Dairy Farm, which had been empty since a fire destroyed the main barn in 2012. The sheriff, Tom Holloway, called a meeting at the station the next morning, pulling in all 8 deputies, including the ones who usually worked day shifts. He spread out a county map on the conference table, marking each incident with red pins, while we compared notes over burnt coffee and stale donuts from the gas and go. Deputy Sheila Vance, who'd worked the east side for 15 years, mentioned that the old Hutchinson property had been seeing some unusual activity lately. Delivery trucks using the access road at odd hours, fresh tire tracks near the burned barn's foundation, and Jim Newton, who farmed the adjacent land, swearing he'd seen lights in the ruins even though the power had been cut years ago. We decided to set up surveillance rotations, but Tom wanted us to be careful. Whoever this was had been smart enough to avoid leaving fingerprints, never spoke or showed their face clearly, and seemed to know exactly when families would be most vulnerable. The way Tom's jaw clenched when he talked about it told me he was thinking what we were all thinking. This person was escalating, getting bolder with each attempt, and it was only a matter of time before they found a door someone forgot to lock or a window that wouldn't hold. That night, Colton and I took the first surveillance shift at the Hutchinson property, parking our cruiser behind a stand of cottonwood trees where we could watch both the access road and the burned barn. Around 11 p.m., just as Colton was pouring coffee from his thermos, we saw movement near the barn's collapsed north wall, a figure carrying what looked like a camping lantern, moving between the rubble with purpose. We called for backup and approached on foot, weapons drawn, moving through the tall grass that hadn't been mowed in years. The closer we got, the more details became visible in the moonlight. A lean man, maybe 6 feet tall, wearing layered clothing despite the August heat, work boots that matched our crime scene prints, and a backpack that clinked with what sounded like tools. He was pulling something from a hidden cache in the barn's old foundation: canned goods, water bottles, and what looked like bundles of cash wrapped in plastic. When Colton's foot snapped a branch, the man spun around, and in that split second before he bolted, I saw his face clearly. Hollow cheeks, weeks of beard growth, and eyes that had the desperate, calculated look of someone who'd been running for a long time and had nothing left to lose. The chase through those dark fields lasted maybe 10 minutes, but felt like hours. Our flashlight beams cutting through corn rows while this guy moved like he'd memorized every furrow and fence line. He vaulted over a barbed wire fence without slowing down, crashed through the Newton's sunflower field, and disappeared into a drainage culvert that ran under Highway 36. By the time our backup arrived, 2 more units plus a state trooper who happened to be passing through, we'd lost him completely. But searching the barn with proper lights revealed his makeshift camp. A sleeping bag hidden in an old grain bin, notebooks filled with hand-drawn maps of every farmhouse within 10 miles, detailed schedules of when families left for work or church, and dozens of pages documenting which houses had dogs, security lights, or elderly residents who might be easier targets. There were also newspaper clippings from Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota about home invasions, circled want ads for farm labor positions, and a police scanner with frequencies for 6 different counties programmed in. Most disturbing was a calendar where he'd marked successful supply runs with X's and failed attempts with circles. There were 43 marks going back 2 months, meaning he'd been in our county far longer than we'd realized. The state police took over the scene within hours, and by dawn we had a name. Walter Eugene Dobbs, 41 years old, wanted for killing a gas station clerk during a robbery in Minnesota 3 months prior. His prints matched ones found on a water bottle in the barn, and suddenly we weren't just dealing with a persistent burglar, but a desperate murderer who'd been living among us, studying our community like a wolf studying sheep. The FBI arrived that afternoon with their mobile command unit, setting up in the sheriff's station parking lot, while agents in suits interviewed every family who'd reported incidents. They showed us Dobbs's history, a string of increasingly violent crimes across 3 states, starting with theft and escalating to armed robbery, after his construction business failed and his wife left with their kids. He'd been smart enough to ditch his car somewhere and travel on foot through rural areas, breaking into vacation homes and barns for supplies, never staying anywhere long enough to establish a pattern until now. Special Agent Reese, a woman who looked too young for the authority she commanded, explained that Dobbs had likely chosen our county because of its isolation and the abundance of empty properties where he could hide between his nighttime reconnaissance missions. We spent the next 4 days in a manhunt that turned our quiet county into something from a movie. Helicopters with heat sensors flying grid patterns over cornfields, K9 units from 3 different departments tracking scent trails that kept going cold at stream crossings, and roadblocks on every highway, where deputies checked trunks and looked into the frightened eyes of families who'd never seen this many police in their lives. Dobbs had become a ghost, but he'd left traces everywhere. A broken window at the abandoned Greenfield schoolhouse where he'd stolen preserved food from the old cafeteria, footprints near the water tower where he'd likely been watching the search patterns, and a stolen bicycle from the Mennonite community that we found ditched near the river. Every night, families called reporting sounds that turned out to be wind or animals, but we responded to each one because we knew Dobbs was still out there, probably watching us search for him, adapting his tactics based on what he observed. Agent Reese set up a tip line that got over 200 calls the first day, mostly false sightings, but a few that helped us understand his movement patterns. He traveled at night, avoided roads with streetlights, and seemed to have an uncanny ability to predict our patrol routes. On the 5th night, everything came to a head in a way none of us expected. I was manning the command post at the station when Joyce patched through a 911 call from the Bannister farm. But it wasn't about prowlers or break-ins. Their 9-year-old son Kevin had gone missing from his bedroom. The window was open, the screen pushed out from inside, and small footprints in the dirt showed Kevin had climbed out on his own, apparently chasing after their cat that had been acting strange all evening. His parents had searched the immediate area with no luck, and with Dobbs still at large, every missing child call carried a weight that made my chest tight. Within minutes, we had 20 officers converging on the Bannister property, which sat right in the middle of the zone where Dobbs had been operating. As we organized search teams, Colton noticed something on his map. The Bannister farm was only half a mile from an old storm shelter on the abandoned Zimmerman property, a place we'd marked as a potential hiding spot, but hadn't yet searched. If Kevin had wandered that direction chasing his cat, and if Dobbs was using that shelter, we were looking at a situation that could go very bad very fast. I led a team of 4 officers toward the Zimmerman property, moving fast but quiet through the wheat fields, while other teams spread out in different directions. The storm shelter's entrance was hidden behind overgrown brambles, but fresh disturbances in the vegetation showed someone had been using it recently. As we approached, I heard voices, a child's high-pitched questions and a man's low responses. Through a crack in the old wooden doors, I could see Kevin sitting on an overturned bucket, petting his orange tabby cat while Dobbs sat against the wall, his head in his hands, looking more exhausted than dangerous. The conversation I overheard changed everything I thought about this situation. Kevin was asking if Dobbs was homeless, why he was living in the secret underground fort, and Dobbs was telling him he needed to go home, that his parents would be worried, that being out here wasn't safe for kids. When Kevin asked if Dobbs was the scary man everyone was looking for, Dobbs just stared at the dirt floor and said, "Yeah, kid, I'm him, but I'm not gonna hurt you." Just wanted to disappear, and everything went wrong. The way his voice cracked on those last words, the way he kept distance between himself and the boy, made me realize we were dealing with someone who'd crossed lines he couldn't uncross, but still had enough humanity left to protect a child who'd stumbled into his hiding place. We had the shelter surrounded, weapons drawn, but I made the call to try talking first. Kevin was too close to Dobbs for anyone to take a clean shot without risking the boy. I announced our presence calmly, told Dobbs we knew Kevin was with him, and asked him to send the boy out. There was a long silence before Dobbs responded, his voice steady but tired. "I'm sending him out. Don't shoot. I know how this ends, but the kid doesn't need to see it." The doors creaked open and Kevin walked out, still carrying his cat, looking confused about why so many police officers were pointing guns at the dark entrance behind him. Officer Vance grabbed Kevin and carried him to safety while the rest of us kept our positions. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. Just us staring at that black rectangle of doorway and knowing a desperate killer was deciding whether to come out or make us come in after him. Then Dobbs appeared, hands visible but not raised, looking smaller than I'd expected, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that had lost too much weight from weeks of running. He took 3 steps into the moonlight, saw the circle of officers, the rifles, the inevitable end of his flight, and did something I'll never forget. He looked straight at me and said, "Deputy, there's a woman in Topeka, Sandra Phillips. I took $800 from her purse at a rest stop. She probably thinks she lost it. Make sure she knows she didn't. Tell her I'm sorry." The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Dobbs went to his knees, hands behind his head, complying with every command while Agent Reese read him his rights. As we loaded him into the state police transport, he asked if Kevin was okay, if the boy was scared, and seemed genuinely relieved when I told him Kevin thought the whole thing was an adventure. The FBI found 2 more hideouts over the next week, each with the same meticulous notes and supply caches, painting a picture of a man who'd been trying to survive without hurting anyone else after that first killing, which his lawyer would later claim was self-defense gone wrong. Our county returned to normal surprisingly fast. Within a month, the only reminders were new locks on doors and a few families who'd installed motion lights. The Whelan family moved closer to town. The Bannister boy became a local celebrity at school, and Joyce went back to dispatching calls about loose cattle and bar fights. But I still think about Dobbs sometimes, especially on quiet nights when I'm parked behind that old Texaco station, wondering how someone goes from owning a construction business to living in abandoned barns, testing doorknobs in the darkness, looking for a way in but really just trying not to disappear completely. My badge number was 4827, and I'd been carrying it for over 2 decades when we caught the case that still keeps me up at night. Phoenix North Precinct had become my second home, where I spent most shifts dealing with property crimes and domestic disputes that rarely made headlines. My partner had just retired, leaving me paired with Officer Daniels, a rookie so green he still ironed creases into his uniform sharp enough to slice bread. It was a Sunday afternoon in early November when dispatch crackled through our radio about a woman claiming she'd been robbed by paramedics. Daniels and I exchanged that look veteran cops give rookies, the one that says, "Get ready for another wild goose chase." We figured it was probably someone confused about medical billing or mixed up on their medications. But when we pulled into that middle-class neighborhood with its cookie-cutter mailboxes and children's toys scattered across driveways, we found Mrs. Blackwood pacing her lawn in her Sunday church dress, gripping her phone like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Mrs. Blackwood had that specific tremor in her voice that immediately told me this wasn't confusion. This was genuine fear. She explained how 2 days earlier she'd been watering her garden when a minor collision happened at the intersection visible from her yard. Just a simple rear-end bump, both drivers standing around exchanging information. But within 3 minutes, she said, an ambulance arrived. Except everything about it was wrong. White vehicle with red and blue markings, yes, but the lettering looked handmade, like someone had bought vinyl letters from a hardware store and slapped them on crooked. 2 men emerged wearing Navy uniforms that seemed bought, not issued. Too new, too stiff, with patches that didn't quite match any service she recognized. One carried a medical bag held together with duct tape on one corner, while his partner wheeled out a gurney for what was clearly a minor fender bender. They kept pressing both drivers for their home addresses, claiming it was required for their community wellness follow-up program. She watched them work on both drivers for maybe 10 minutes, taking blood pressure, flashing pen lights in eyes, all the standard stuff you'd expect. But Mrs. Blackwood had a nephew who worked as a real EMT in Scottsdale, and she'd seen him in action enough times to know something was wrong with their technique. They held the blood pressure cuff backwards, wrapped it too high on the arm. When they used the stethoscope, they placed it over clothing instead of asking to listen directly against skin. Small things that most people wouldn't notice, but she did. What really set off her alarm was when the shorter one, she described him as having a neck tattoo of some kind of bird, maybe a crow, started asking one driver about who else lived in their home, if they had any pets, what their work schedule was like. Medical questions that weren't medical at all. She grabbed her phone to film them, but the moment she raised it, the taller one noticed and immediately began packing up their equipment. I asked Mrs. Blackwood what happened next, and she said they loaded up fast, too fast for professionals who should be ensuring patient safety. No paperwork, no exchange of information with the victims, just a rapid retreat to their makeshift ambulance. She managed to get a partial plate number, started with 7G4, she was certain about that much. But here's where her story took a turn that made my skin prickle. She said about 6 hours later, after dark, she saw that same ambulance creeping down her street with its lights off. It stopped 4 houses down, right in front of the Nguyens place, where one of the accident victims lived. She watched 2 figures get out, but this time they weren't in paramedic uniforms. Dark clothing, baseball caps pulled low. They walked up the driveway like they belonged there, and within seconds they were at the back of the house. Mrs. Blackwood called 911 immediately, but by the time a unit arrived 8 minutes later, the fake ambulance was gone, and the Nguyens' back door was standing wide open. Daniels and I drove straight to the Nguyen residence after taking Mrs. Blackwood's statement. What we found there turned this from a strange complaint into a full-scale investigation. Mr. Nguyen, a 60-year-old accountant, was in his living room with an ice pack pressed against a fresh bruise on his temple. His wife sat beside him, still trembling, clutching their cordless phone. They'd been having dinner when they heard someone trying their back door. Mr. Nguyen went to check, thinking it might be their neighbor's cat that sometimes scratched at their screen. Instead, he found two men already inside his kitchen. One was rifling through drawers while the other was heading toward the living room carrying what looked like a crowbar. Mr. Nguyen tried to shout, but the one with the crowbar moved fast, shoving him hard against the refrigerator. They demanded to know where the safe was, where they kept jewelry, cash, electronics. When Mrs. Nguyen screamed from the dining room, the intruders seemed to panic. They grabbed Mr. Nguyen's wallet from the counter, a laptop from the breakfast nook, and Mrs. Nguyen's purse before rushing out the same way they came in. What made this case particularly disturbing was what Mr. Nguyen told us next. He recognized one of the intruders despite the baseball cap and darkness. It was the same man who had taken his blood pressure at the accident scene 2 days earlier. Same height, same build, and most tellingly, the same unusual scar that ran across the back of his right hand, shaped like a constellation of small circles, probably an old burn mark. Mr. Nguyen remembered it distinctly because the man hadn't worn gloves during the supposed medical examination, which had struck him as unprofessional even at the time. But in his post-accident days, with everyone telling him he needed to be checked for whiplash, he'd simply given them his information when asked. His full name, his address for their records, even mentioning he worked late shifts on Wednesdays and Fridays when they asked about his availability for follow-up care. He'd essentially given them a blueprint for the robbery without realizing it. Mrs. Nguyen added that she'd seen the fake ambulance drive by their house twice the day before the break-in, slow enough that she'd wondered if they were lost. We put out a bolo for the fake ambulance immediately, but I had a sinking feeling these guys were too smart to keep using the same vehicle. Daniel started calling local rental companies while I reached out to every legitimate ambulance service in the county to see if any vehicles or uniforms had been reported stolen. That's when things got interesting. Phoenix General had reported a break-in at one of their storage facilities 3 weeks earlier. Someone had cut through a chain-link fence and stolen 2 old paramedic uniforms scheduled for disposal, along with expired medical supplies, blood pressure cuffs, stethoscopes, cervical collars, the works. They hadn't taken any drugs or valuable equipment, just the basic items someone would need to look the part. Security footage showed 2 men loading boxes into a white van around 3 a.m. One was heavy-set with what appeared to be a neck tattoo, the other thin and tall with a distinctive limp in his left leg that made him drag his foot slightly when he walked. By Monday morning, we had 3 more reports. A woman in Glendale said fake paramedics had shown up after her teenage son's skateboarding accident at a local park, asking invasive questions about their home security system while pretending to check for a concussion. A man in Tempe reported that 2 paramedics had appeared at his elderly mother's house, claiming they'd received an emergency call. Even though no one had dialed 911, they'd insisted on coming inside to check her vitals, during which they'd apparently scoped out her entire first floor. The 3rd report came from a family in Mesa, whose home had been burglarized 5 days after fake paramedics had treated the father for a minor cut at a construction site where he'd been working. Each victim described the same 2 men, one with the neck tattoo, one with the limp, though they'd used different names each time. Gary and Pete, Steve and Mike, Paul and John. Generic, forgettable, probably fake. Our break came from an unexpected source. A real paramedic named Christopher Watts contacted us after hearing about the cases from a colleague. He'd been at a gas station in Chandler filling up his legitimate ambulance when he noticed another ambulance at the next pump that made him pause. Everything looked right at first glance, but small details were wrong. Real ambulances have specific equipment mounting brackets visible through the back windows. This one had empty spaces where those brackets should be. Plus, the license plate format was wrong for an emergency vehicle, and the unit number on the side, Unit 47, didn't exist in any fleet he knew of. He'd taken a photo with his phone, initially planning to report it to his supervisor as a possible decommissioned vehicle being used inappropriately. In the photo, clear as day, we could see the partial plate Mrs. Blackwood had mentioned, 7G4 something, and in the driver's seat, a man wearing a baseball cap. But what Watts noticed that we'd missed was the parking permit sticker on the windshield. It was for Desert Springs Industrial Park, a complex of warehouses and storage units about 15 miles outside the city. Daniels and I drove out to Desert Springs that same afternoon with 2 backup units. We didn't want to spook them if they were there, so we had the manager quietly walk us through the tenant list. Most were legitimate businesses, plumbing supplies, furniture storage, that sort of thing. But one unit had been rented just a month ago, paid 3 months in advance in cash by someone named Michael Smith. About as generic as you could get. The security footage from the rental day was grainy, but showed a tall man with a slight limp filling out paperwork. We positioned ourselves carefully and had the manager call the lock code to open Unit 38B. When that metal door rolled up, we found ourselves looking at the fake ambulance, its hood still warm. Inside the unit beyond it were boxes of medical supplies, several paramedic uniforms in various sizes, and most disturbing of all, a corkboard covered in photos and notes. Pictures taken at accident scenes, houses photographed from the street, work schedules written in neat handwriting, even hand-drawn floor plans with security systems marked. They'd been running this operation like a business, methodical and organized. We set up surveillance immediately, but these guys must have had a second sense about cops. They never came back to the warehouse. However, the evidence we collected from that unit was extensive. Fingerprints on the medical equipment led us to 2 men with significant criminal histories. The first was Donald Briggs, 38, with priors for burglary and identity theft. He'd actually worked as an orderly in a hospital for 6 months before being fired for stealing from patients. That's probably where he learned enough medical terminology to fake it. The second was Christopher Vaughn, 41, whose rap sheet included home invasion and assault. He'd gotten the limp from a motorcycle accident during a police chase 5 years earlier. Both had been released from state prison within the last 18 months. We tracked Briggs down 4 days later at his girlfriend's apartment in Tucson. He was packing to leave when we knocked on the door. Vaughn took longer, 2 weeks of following leads before we found him hiding out with his cousin in a trailer park near Flagstaff. Both were wearing stolen medical ID badges when we arrested them, from 2 different hospitals, with their own photos but fake names. During interrogation, Briggs broke first. He admitted they'd gotten the idea after Vaughn's cousin, who worked in medical billing, mentioned how much personal information paramedics collected. They'd started by following real ambulances to accident scenes, watching and learning the routine. After stealing the equipment and uniforms, they'd practiced on each other until they could convincingly take vitals and ask the right questions. They specifically targeted minor accidents because people were shaken, but not badly hurt enough to notice mistakes. The fake follow-up care story was Briggs's idea. It gave them a legitimate-sounding reason to get addresses and schedules. They'd hit 17 homes total over 6 weeks, stealing over $200,000 in cash, jewelry, and electronics. Some victims didn't even realize the paramedics who'd helped them were connected to their burglaries until we contacted them. Both men pled guilty to avoid trial, getting 15 to 20 years each. But what still bothers me is Briggs' final statement during sentencing. He said they weren't the only ones doing this, that he'd heard about similar operations in other states. We sent out warnings to law enforcement nationwide, and sure enough, reports started coming in from Nevada, New Mexico, even as far as Texas. Turns out, this scheme had spread like a virus through prison networks, with released inmates sharing the playbook. When the call first came through dispatch, it was logged as a possible dead animal complaint. Out in rural areas, that wasn't unusual. Livestock died, deer got hit on the road, people burned trash in ways that stank up the place. But the tone in the caller's voice stuck with me. She lived on the property next to the old farmhouse and insisted this wasn't the smell of a hog rotting in the field. She said it was human. I'd been a deputy for years, and I'd learned to listen when locals used that word. It wasn't the kind of description people threw around lightly. By the time I arrived at the farmhouse, another cruiser was already there. Deputy Harlan had pulled up ahead of me, leaning against his car with his arms crossed. The place looked the same as it had for years, roofline slumped, boards nailed over the windows, weeds taller than a man choking the yard. What was different was the smell. Even before I shut my door, I caught it. Dense, sour, almost sweet in the worst way. Harlan didn't say anything. He just pointed toward the back of the property, his jaw tight. We both knew what that smell meant, though neither of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud. We moved around the side of the farmhouse, our boots crunching on broken glass and dry dirt. Behind the house stood a patch of pecan trees, their shadows stretched long in the late afternoon light. That's where the ground looked wrong. Freshly turned soil, darker patches like the earth had been cut open and stitched together poorly. One of the mounds was so shallow that part of a boot sole was poking through, black leather cracked and covered in flies. I didn't need to get closer to understand what we'd stumbled onto, but protocol demanded we did. My throat felt dry, but I steadied myself and kept walking. We radioed for the coroner and backup, then started marking the ground with whatever we had in our kits, orange flags fluttering against the breeze. The smell was unbearable now, thick enough that it coated the inside of my mouth. I tried to focus on the details, the spacing between the graves, the angle of the disturbed soil, whether the same tool had been used to dig each hole. Whoever had done this hadn't bothered to go deep. Felt careless, almost like they thought no one would ever come looking. That thought bothered me more than the sight itself. As we worked the scene, I couldn't shake the eerie quiet around us. The farmhouse itself was hollow, its boards creaking faintly in the breeze like a house trying to breathe. I peered inside through a gap in the wood, and the interior was stripped bare. No furniture, just scraps of paper and an old mattress collapsed in the corner. Whoever had been staying there hadn't left much behind, but it was enough to suggest someone had been living inside recently. The realization made my skin prickle. This wasn't just a dump site, it was a hideout. When detectives arrived, we started canvassing the neighbors, though neighbors out here meant folks who lived a mile or two away. A farmhand named Curtis told us about a drifter who'd worked seasonal jobs in the area. He described him as quiet, always moving, never giving a straight answer about where he came from. Said he'd been last seen walking down the county road with a canvas duffel and a shovel strapped across his back like it was the most normal thing in the world. Hearing that detail, I felt something twist in my chest. Whoever this man was, he had confidence, enough to walk in plain sight while hiding the darkest of secrets. Back at the farmhouse, cadaver dogs were brought in. Watching them weave through the property made the air feel heavier, like we were all holding our breath at once. They alerted in 3 separate spots beyond the initial graves, tails rigid, noses pressed hard against the dirt. We marked each one, the flags dotting the field like some grotesque garden. By sundown, the coroner's team was working under floodlights, carefully lifting soil layer by layer. The smell only intensified, pushing deputies to take turns stepping away for fresh air. I stayed, though. I didn't want to look like I couldn't handle it, even when the bile threatened at the back of my throat. What struck me most wasn't just the bodies, it was who they were. The first identification came through. A transient worker who had been missing for weeks. Someone no one in town had reported right away because he had no close family here. Then another, a man who'd been traveling for seasonal harvest work. They all shared that same pattern, isolated, mobile, with no one to sound the alarm quickly. It dawned on me that whoever buried them here had chosen his victims carefully. He'd picked people who would slip through the cracks without raising suspicions. As the night dragged on, floodlights turned the field into a stage, every shovel of dirt revealing more of what had been hidden. Standing there, I couldn't help but think about how many times I had driven past that farmhouse without a second thought. It had been right under our noses the whole time. The crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, and every now and then the house creaked, as if mocking us for not finding the truth sooner. Some deputies muttered that it felt like the ground itself was exhaling secrets that had been buried too long. Over the following days, the investigation revealed a clearer picture. A drifter, moving from job to job, blending into the background, had been using the farmhouse as a base. He targeted workers like him, people traveling through, invisible to most. I sat in on interviews where other laborers remembered him faintly. Tall, wiry, with a way of keeping to himself but always listening. No one could pin down where he came from, and by the time we pieced it all together, he had already vanished. It was as if he had stepped off the face of the earth, leaving nothing but the graves behind. What stayed with me wasn't just the brutality, it was the quiet calculation. He knew who wouldn't be missed quickly. He knew which roads stayed empty at night, and which houses no one bothered to check. It wasn't random, it was methodical. And as much as I tried to tell myself the case would eventually close, deep down I doubted it. Men like him don't just stop. They move on, find another forgotten corner, and start over. That thought gnawed at me whenever I drove past empty farmhouses or saw an unfamiliar face drifting through town. To this day, whenever I catch that particular smell, sharp, sweet, and wrong, it takes me straight back to that night behind the farmhouse. We never caught him, not officially. The graves were exhumed, the victims given whatever dignity could be restored, and the case sits in a drawer labeled open. I've handled robberies, assaults, domestic calls, everything a small county can throw at a deputy, but nothing ever lodged in my memory like those shallow graves. Sometimes I wonder if he's out there still, walking some other back road with a shovel slung across his back, confident no one's paying attention. That night had already been dragging when the call came in. I was parked near the edge of town, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, waiting for something to break the monotony of the shift. Dispatch radioed about a disturbance at a roadside motel off the highway. A guest swore someone had entered his room while he slept. He claimed the man just stood there before leaving. At first it sounded like one of those half-asleep panic moments people report after nightmares, but policy meant we had to check it out. I rolled my cruiser down that empty stretch, the neon motel sign buzzing faintly in the distance like a tired heartbeat. The place was called Pine Rest Motel, one of those low-slung buildings with peeling paint and doors that opened right onto the parking lot. A couple of trucks sat scattered across the lot, their hoods still warm under the yellow lamps. The night clerk, a jittery man with thinning hair named Elliot, flagged me down before I'd even put the car in park. He kept glancing at the glass office door as if expecting someone to appear behind it. "Room 14, he said, voice low. "Guy inside swears someone came in with a key." He looked pale and not the type who spooked easy. I took it seriously from that point on. The guest, Daniel Ward, met me at the doorway of his room. He was in sweatpants and a t-shirt, barefoot on the cold concrete. His eyes were wide and restless, scanning the parking lot like he thought the man might still be around. He told me he'd woken to see a figure standing near the foot of his bed. "Tall guy, just watching," he muttered, arms crossed tight. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks. That's when the detail hit me. He insisted the man slipped out using a key. That narrowed things down in a way I didn't like. I walked the hallway after speaking with him. Every door identical, numbers hanging slightly crooked. The air carried that heavy mix of bleach and mildew motels never quite shake off. At first glance, nothing stood out. No shadows moving, no strange sounds. But the silence felt unnatural. Back at the office, Elliot admitted they'd lost a staff member months ago, fired under tense circumstances. He never returned his master key. The name made my skin prickle, because I remembered the guy too. Travis Nolan, a maintenance worker I'd crossed paths with once during a noise complaint. He'd had a strange way of standing too close, like he wanted to remind you he was bigger than you thought. The motel had a grainy surveillance system, 2 exterior cameras covering the parking lot and one angled toward the front hallway. Elliot unlocked the monitor cabinet for me, his hands fumbling with the keys like he was afraid of what we'd find. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough. Around 2:40 a.m., a tall figure in a dark jacket walked directly to room 14. No hesitation, no fumbling with the handle. The door opened smooth as if he belonged there. The figure lingered inside for nearly 3 minutes before slipping back out, moving down the row of rooms until he disappeared into the shadows near the dumpsters. No vehicle ever pulled away. He was still out there. I stepped back outside, the parking lot suddenly feeling too wide and too quiet. A single soda machine hummed near the end of the walkway, casting a dull red glow. I checked every corner, every blind spot, flashlight beam cutting across peeling stucco and rusted railings. Nothing. Still, the footage was undeniable. Whoever had the key wasn't breaking in. They were letting themselves in like it was their second home. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed when I returned, head in his hands, muttering that he'd known it wasn't a dream. I couldn't give him reassurance, not yet. We were dealing with someone who had probably done this more than once. The more I pressed Elliot, the more cracks showed. He admitted other guests had filed small complaints over the last few weeks. Doors left ajar in the mornings. Personal items shifted slightly. One woman swearing her suitcase had been unzipped, though nothing was stolen. They'd chalked it up to forgetful travelers. But paired with what we had on video, it painted a sick picture. Travis wasn't just sneaking in. He was watching people sleep, standing in their rooms like a shadow waiting for them to stir. It wasn't burglary. It was something far stranger. I called for backup, another unit to sweep the area and canvass the nearby streets. Meanwhile, I kept close to the rooms, talking quietly with guests, making sure they locked their doors with the latch engaged. Some were groggy, annoyed. Others downright shaken once I explained there'd been a confirmed intruder. I remember one older man in room 19, clutching a baseball bat, saying he'd thought he saw someone at his window the night before but dismissed it. Piece by piece, the pattern formed. Travis had likely been slipping in for weeks, maybe months, haunting that motel without anyone realizing. Around 4 a.m., one of the backup units spotted movement near the tree line behind the dumpsters. They cut their headlights and eased the cruiser in while I circled around on foot. The beam of my flashlight caught a man crouched low, half hidden behind an old mattress someone had dumped there. It was Travis. Same dark jacket, same heavy boots I remembered from before. In his hand dangled a ring of keys that jingled softly with every twitch. He didn't run, just stared like he'd been caught in the middle of some ritual. The look in his eyes wasn't rage or fear. It was flat, practiced, like he'd expected this moment sooner or later. We cuffed him without resistance. Back in the office, I laid out the keys on the counter. Not just one master key, but several duplicates he'd had made. Each one was marked with tiny scratches like they'd been used dozens of times. Travis kept quiet through most of it, only muttering once that he liked the quiet hours. Nothing about stealing, nothing about harming anyone, just watching. The thought of him standing silently in the dark, hovering over people while they slept, made my skin crawl in a way few cases ever had. It wasn't about property or money. It was about control, about inserting himself into someone's most vulnerable moments. We went back through the surveillance archives with Elliot, and sure enough, Travis showed up again and again. Different rooms, different nights, slipping in for just a few minutes before fading out like smoke. Some guests never even knew he'd been there. Others had shrugged off small signs. An open curtain, a lamp moved slightly, a suitcase unzipped. It all made sense now. He'd been haunting that place like a phantom with a key, leaving no real trace except the unease people couldn't explain. By sunrise, Travis was sitting in a holding cell downtown, and the Pine Rest Motel had a locksmith on site changing every lock on the property. I finished my report exhausted, replaying the footage in my head. I'd worked burglary, assaults, even homicides, but there was something uniquely disturbing about this one. The idea that a stranger could stand in your room, watch you breathe, and slip away without you ever knowing. It unsettled me in a way that lingers even now. Sometimes it's not the loud crimes that leave scars, but the quiet ones carried out in the dark while you sleep. I've been on the force long enough to know that certain addresses have a way of sticking to you. In my district, one house in particular became almost like a second beat. Dispatch would drop the call, and before they even finished giving the details, I already knew where I was heading. Same number, same block, different names on the mailbox over the years. At the time, I chalked it up to bad luck. Some homes just attract trouble. But that place carved itself into my memory in ways that no routine call ever should. The first time I went there, the walls practically vibrated from the yelling inside. The neighbors had been calling us so often that by the time we pulled up, a small crowd would already be outside pretending to mind their own business. Inside, the air felt heavy, like a storm had passed through. Furniture pushed out of place, framed pictures crooked on the walls. The couple living there, Dan and Melissa, looked like they hadn't slept in days. He had a cut on his cheek. She had bruises along her arms, and both insisted nothing serious had happened. Still, we filed the report, separated them for the night, and drove away knowing it wouldn't be the last time. Weeks later, it wasn't just them. Another family moved in after they split, and the same cycle began. Screaming matches, broken dishes, frantic 911 calls. The names changed, but the script never did. By then, every officer on shift knew that address. It became the kind of place where you'd instinctively keep your hand near your holster, not because of weapons, but because of the tension that clung to the walls. I remember once standing in the kitchen while the latest couple hurled accusations at each other, and I could hear every word echoing like we were inside a drum. The sound bounced so hard, it made even calm voices sound like shouting. After years of this, I stopped treating it as coincidence. Too many families, too many calls, always escalating the same way. It reached a point where our captain asked for a deeper look, records going back decades, not just the last few years. That's when the picture shifted. We realized it wasn't one bad couple or even two. Every single family that had lived under that roof ended up in the same spiral. Police calls, restraining orders, sometimes arrests. The report stacked up like a grim timeline, each set of names replacing the last, but the outcome never changing. It wasn't supernatural. It was something far more unsettling because it was real, tangible, and documented. By digging into the files, we noticed details that most people wouldn't consider at first glance. The walls of that house were paper thin, and the insulation was practically non-existent. Neighbors on both sides had filed noise complaints for years. Not just about fights, but even normal conversations carrying clear as day through the plaster. Imagine living in a place where even a quiet disagreement sounded like shouting, where every word bounced and amplified until it felt explosive. That kind of constant echo wasn't just annoying. It was fuel poured onto every spark of frustration inside those walls. Then there were the families themselves. Background checks showed a disturbing overlap. Couples with prior histories of abuse, parents with unresolved criminal records, or people already stretched thin financially. Moving into that house seemed to set them on a collision course. Some of it was bad coincidence, sure, but the more we studied it, the less random it felt. It was like the environment took whatever cracks already existed in their lives and split them wide open. Officers who'd been there before me said they'd always felt an unusual intensity there, like even the smallest argument could ignite into chaos. I remember one night especially well. A teenage daughter had called us after her parents' fight spilled into the front yard. By the time I arrived, she was sitting on the porch steps, rocking back and forth, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's always the same here. It's always the same." At first, I thought she meant her parents. Later, after reviewing decades of reports, that phrase hit me harder than any crime scene photo ever could. She had unknowingly summed up the history of that house better than we ever had. It became clear that this wasn't the kind of mystery people like to dress up as haunted or cursed. There was nothing spectral lurking in the hallways. What lived there was much simpler, and in a way, much darker. Years of bad history repeating itself, amplified by an environment designed to magnify stress and conflict until it broke people apart. No ghosts, no demons, just the weight of real human violence, layered so thick into that address that it seemed impossible to imagine anything else happening there. The city eventually got involved. After reviewing our findings, housing officials declared the property unfit for occupancy until major renovations were done. It wasn't condemned, but it might as well have been. Contractors tore open the walls and confirmed what we'd suspected: layers of cheap plaster, no insulation, and even structural flaws that carried vibration straight through the beams. Every word spoken inside ricocheted across the entire house. Combined with the building's age and the fact that most tenants came in already under stress, it was like a pressure cooker designed to fail. I drove by the house during the renovations, and for the first time in years, it was quiet. No kids on the porch, no shouting from behind the screen door, no patrol cars idling at the curb, just scaffolding, bare studs, and workers carrying out debris. It was strange to see the place stripped to its skeleton, almost like the house itself was being interrogated, piece by piece, until it gave up all its secrets. Watching that process, I realized how many nights of shouting, crying, and slamming doors had soaked into those walls. When the work was finished, the property was listed again. A young couple with no kids moved in, and we all waited, half expecting history to repeat itself. Months passed without a single call. Then a year. Then 2. No fights spilling onto the lawn. No 911 calls from terrified neighbors. No familiar address popping up on the dispatch screen. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard from that place, and for once, it was a relief. I still patrol that area, and sometimes I catch myself slowing down when I drive past. The house looks ordinary now, just another place on the block. But I can't unsee the years of damage it witnessed, the families it broke down, the countless reports I filed under its address. People ask if I believe in cursed houses. I don't. I believe in the way environments push people to their breaking points, and how history can repeat itself if nobody steps in. That house taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts. It's the way real life grinds people down, behind closed doors, until there's nothing left but chaos.